I had never imagined that I would be a single father, but unfortunately, I had no other choice. My wife and I met in high school and we fell in love at first sight. We began to date, and after we graduated college, we got married and began trying to have children as we both wanted to start a family more than anything in the whole world. We would talk for hours about how many children we wanted, but then we found out that I had a condition. While I wasn't infertile, it would take medical intervention for us to be able to conceive a child. Thankfully, we were both working good jobs and were able to afford the treatment we needed. And not long after, our son was born. It was hard to know that we would have only one child, but we were happy and cherished the blessing that our son was to us. Unfortunately, though, years later, tragedy struck again when my wife developed cancer. She fought hard, but the disease was just too aggressive, and she passed. I had never imagined losing my wife at such a young age, and for my 13-year-old son to lose his mother was devastating. It took years of therapy for us to heal and to process that amount of pain. The years passed, and I found myself beginning to feel lonely. And while the pain of losing my wife was still there, it had lessened greatly. Even my son noticed, and while it was difficult to think about, he encouraged me to start dating.
Hey Dad, listen, I miss Mom a lot too, but she wouldn't want you to go through the rest of your life alone. I know it's hard, but maybe you should put yourself out there. You never know. You might meet someone.
I know you're right, Michael. I'll give it some thought. He was right, of course. But getting back into the dating scene was awkward for me. I must have went on dozens of first dates, but they never amounted to a second until I met Megan. She was so patient and understanding, and before I knew it, we had been dating for close to a year. She made me feel so loved that I proposed to her, and she said yes. The ceremony was small, but neither of us cared. We were just so happy to have found each other, and I was happy that I had found Michael a mother that loved him as much as I did. Soon after we were married, Megan moved in with us, and not long afterwards, I began to notice Michael acting strangely. He began to have outbursts in school and was getting into fights. Even his grades began to slip. He went from getting high marks to just barely passing. And when I asked him what was wrong, he yelled at me and told me to leave him alone. I had always known that having a teenage boy would be challenging, but I had never dreamed it would be this difficult. The more I tried to get him to talk to me, the more aggressive and distant he became. I was incredibly worried, although speaking with Megan about it definitely helped. I just don't know what to do. He's never been like this before. It's like he's a completely different person.
Well, maybe it's just because he needs time to adjust. For a long time, it was just the two of you, and now he has to get used to having a stepmother. Give him time. I'm sure he'll come around.
You're probably right. It's just really hard seeing him go through this. I hadn't considered that the reason he was acting out was because of Megan, but it did make a lot of sense. And so I trusted that given enough time and love, that things would sort themselves out. But as the weeks went by, his behavior only worsened. Megan, to her credit, tried to talk with Michael as well. But when she did, it only seemed to make him more agitated. I began to wonder if maybe Megan was right and that Michael was resenting her, thinking that she was replacing his mother, and that upset him deeply. As if that wasn't enough to worry about. Megan began to feel sick on a regular basis. Many of the foods that she normally loved were now making her feel nauseous. This made my stomach drop as my head instantly went to the idea that it was cancer. Worried, I asked her to go and see the doctor immediately. She did, but when she came home, she was smiling from ear to ear.
Oh, honey, it's not bad news at all, but good news. I'm pregnant.
I was floored. I had no idea how this could have happened since I was essentially infertile, although I had never told Megan. After all, we were both older, and I assumed that she wasn't interested in having children. I couldn't help but think that my new wife had cheated on me. My world was spinning. I had no idea what to make of all of this, between my son acting erratically and my wife being pregnant. I didn't know if I could handle any more surprises. I chose to not say anything about my infertility to my wife, and instead pretended to be happy and excited while on the inside, I made plans to find out the truth. I placed an app on her phone so that I could see who she was calling and texting. But after a week of checking her phone and following her whenever she drove somewhere, I didn't see her go anywhere strange or even meet up with anyone. Her only texts were to her parents, my son and myself, although the app didn't allow me to see what the messages said. 2 months into her pregnancy, though, she came home crying and told Michael and I that she had had a miscarriage and lost the baby. I didn't know how to feel. After all, I was certain that it wasn't my child, but I also had no idea who the father was. I didn't know how to feel. That is until I noticed Michael crying even more than Megan was. It's going to be okay, Michael. This is a tragedy, but Megan is going to be okay. We're not going to lose her.
You don't understand. This is so much worse than that.
Michael, sobbing heavily, passed me his phone and showed me the text that he and Megan had been sharing. Megan suddenly stopped crying and grew incredibly angry as she saw Michael pass me the phone. Confused, I looked down at it and began to read. There were several inappropriate texts sent from Megan to Michael. There were images of her wearing nothing at all. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. What is this? Why would you send my son these things?
He probably took them when I wasn't looking. Your son is a peeping Tom.
She's lying, Dad. She's been making me do things that I didn't want to do ever since you started dating her. I'm so sorry, Dad. I truly didn't want to. But she told me that if I said anything, that you would send me away to military school and I would never see you again.
My heart was breaking seeing Michael this upset, but now it all made sense. My son had only been acting out because he didn't know how to process what this adult woman was doing to him. He was being abused, and he didn't know how to handle this very difficult situation, and was reacting in the only way he could think of. How could you do this to my son? Was the baby his? Without responding, Megan quickly turned and ran out the door and drove off so quickly that she almost got into a car accident leaving our driveway. I was shocked, but I knew that my son needed me, and I instantly went over to comfort him. I couldn't believe it. On the one hand, I was furious that my new wife would hurt my family in such a terrible way, but I was even more angry at myself for bringing her into our family to begin with. I hated myself for putting my son in such a terrible situation. It took years before both of us felt well enough to say that we had healed from this latest trauma, but after a lot of therapy, I am happy to say that we have never been closer. It wasn't easy, of course, but I'm thrilled to say that despite all that my son has gone through, that he is married with children of his own, and being a grandfather makes me happier than I could ever imagine. I do get lonely from time to time, but I fill my free time with hobbies and spending time with my grandsons, and I do feel fulfilled. As for Megan, well, she didn't get very far. After she left, I requested that the baby she miscarried be tested, and we found out that my son was indeed the father. With that evidence, I went to the police and charged her with child abuse and sexual assault. Sadly, it did take the police a couple of years to track her down, but once they did, she was charged and is still in prison to this day. It turned out that my son wasn't her first victim, and upon hearing what she had done, the judge that presided over her case had given her the maximum penalty for her crimes. After she had been caught, my son and I sued her for emotional pain and suffering, and were surprised to be awarded over $50,000 each for what she did. Even though she had been on the run after she fled our house, she had been busy working and had made a great deal of money since then. The money, of course, couldn't undo the pain that she had done to us, but it did help to make our lives a little easier. Although I put my share of the money aside, and thanks to some good investments, I am happy to say that my grandsons are going to be receiving enough money to buy themselves their first homes when they are old enough. Thanks for watching.